Lost at sea and thrust into a mythical kingdom of magic and wonder, a sailor's quest for aid turns into an adventure beyond his wildest dreams. Welcome to Stories by Hawk, that's me, where I craft fantastical tales that are easy on your ears and rich with adventure. Today, in this special mini-series, we journey alongside Alexander, a lost sailor who stumbles upon the legendary kingdom of Prestor John, a land of magic, mystery, and destiny. So sit back, relax, and let yourself be transported to a world where myths come to life. Chapter 1: The Unintended Voyage. In the year of our Lord 1177, a hardy sailor found himself in a predicament as an unexpected storm blew him off his original course. Tossed across the relentless sea and shipwrecked on a foreign coast, he woke up under a bright sun to a vision of strange but kind faces. A group of bearded merchants discovered him, half dead on the beach. They were en route to the famed kingdom of Prestor John, and agreed to take him along. As they journeyed, the sailor was awestruck by the massive stone walls that slowly emerged from the horizon, stretching for miles, sheltering the enigmatic kingdom within. Upon passing the colossal gates, he was astounded. The arid desert morphed into a lush tropical landscape. The scent of exotic flowers and ripe fruits hung heavy in the air. The cobblestone streets of the kingdom were vibrant and lively, teeming with exquisite people, adorned in resplendent silk garments. Fruit vendors shouted their offerings from every corner, showcasing fruits he had never seen before. Struck by the kingdom's wealth and order, the sailor determined that he must request an audience with Prestor John. He needed allies to aid his homeland, Constantinople, in a desperate military struggle. While he waited for his meeting, the sailor, drawn to the city's main garden, marveled at the colors in the lush foliage. And it was there he met Melinda, a woman of unmatched beauty, her eyes reflecting the garden's tranquil aura. Melinda, intrigued by this foreigner, guided him around, revealing the hidden secrets of the garden. They spent the day exploring its mysteries, laughing and exchanging stories. As the sun started to set, a profound connection had been forged between them. Just as the last rays of sunlight illuminated Melinda's face, making her look ethereal, a royal messenger arrived with a breathless urgency. "Your audience with Prestor John is granted. You must come at once." The sailor, torn between his mission and newfound friendship, followed the messenger, but turned back to take one last look at Melinda. Just as he did, the ground trembled beneath their feet, and a deafening roar echoed through the city. The tranquility of the garden shattered as people screamed, pointing towards the colossal stone walls. There, where the walls met the sky, a massive cloud of dust was rapidly approaching. The city of Prestor John, it seemed, was under siege. Chapter 2: The Storm of Steel. Alexander felt his heart pound as the city's panic mirrored his own. With one last look at Melinda, they set off towards the gargantuan stone wall, both driven by a shared sense of duty. They felt an unspoken agreement to face the impending danger together. The journey to the wall was fraught with chaos as citizens scrambled for safety. Despite the bedlam, the beauty of the city endured. The rays of the setting sun painted a poignant picture of an idol on the brink of destruction. They reached the base of the walls and looked up. Alexander felt an odd sense of insignificance. The stone monolith stood defiant against the oncoming assault, and they began the arduous climb, their determination outweighing their fear. As they reached the top, they were met with a sight that would forever be seared into their memories. A vast swarm of cavalry, thousands upon thousands, blanketed the horizon like a dark sea. The setting sun reflected off their armor, creating an eerie, fiery glow that sent shivers down Alexander's spine. The terrifying spectacle marked a moment where time seemed to stand still, and the noise of the city's panic faded into an ominous silence. Alexander, a seasoned sailor, was no stranger to overwhelming odds, but even he felt a knot of fear in his stomach. The sheer magnitude of the enemy forces dwarfing the kingdom's defenses painted a grim picture of the impending battle. Melinda gripped his arm, her eyes wide with fear, but also filled with resolve. For the people of this city were her family, her friends, her life. She would not abandon them, and neither would Alexander. As the deafening thunder of hooves echoed off the city walls, and the enemy forces moved relentlessly closer, the pair descended the wall. The beautiful city, now under the threat of annihilation, looked to them for help. And as the first flaming arrows arched overhead and the night sky ignited with deadly rain, Alexander and Melinda were swallowed up in the chaos, ready to fight for the kingdom's survival. Chapter 3. The Veil of Magic. As the night sky lit up with flaming arrows and the ground vibrated with the pounding hooves of the enemy cavalry, Alexander and Melinda found themselves at the heart of the turmoil. A sense of dread filled the air, and the once lush city seemed on the brink of catastrophe. It was then, in the heart of despair, a trumpet sounded, cutting through the chaos with a note of unwavering resolve. All eyes turned towards the royal palace where Prestor John stood, an imposing figure against the chaotic backdrop. A cloak of calm seemed to settle over him as he raised his hands towards the ominous sky. In response to his silent command, the scholars and alchemists of the city appeared on the battlements, carrying strange apparatus and murmuring incantations that hummed with an ancient power. An air of anticipation hung over the kingdom as they set to work under Prestor John's watchful gaze. Suddenly, the scholars thrust their tools toward the sky, and the incantations reached a crescendo. The world seemed to hold its breath as a blinding light burst from their hands, a dazzling spectrum of colors piercing the night. As the light met the sky night, it expanded outwards, unfurling like an ethereal veil. The veil swept towards the invading forces, casting an otherworldly glow over the battlefield. As it passed over the cavalry, a hush fell. The thundering hooves faltered and then came to a standstill. Thousands of warriors froze in place, their fierce war cries silenced. Their very souls seemed bound by the enchantment of Prestor John's scholars, rendering them immobile. The people of the kingdom held their collective breath, waiting for the magic's effect to wane. But moments turned into minutes, and the enemy forces remained still as statues, trapped under the scholar's magic. A cheer erupted from the city walls, a wave of relief washing over the beleaguered city. Alexander and Melinda, hand in hand, watched the spectacle unfold from the city walls. They had witnessed an incredible feat of magic that had turned the tide of the battle. However, their relief was short-lived as they spotted a figure moving amidst the immobilized cavalry. It was the enemy commander, seemingly unaffected by the magic. As he raised his sword towards the city, they realized their troubles were far from over. Chapter 4. The Unspoken Bond. With the immobilized cavalry in their sight and the enemy commander challenging them, Alexander and Melinda stood silent, absorbing the spectacle they had just witnessed. "It's magic," Melinda murmured, her voice barely audible over the city's jubilant cheers. "I've heard stories of Prestor John's scholars and their power, but I've never seen it, not until now." Alexander nodded, the sailor in him a touch wary of this unfamiliar magic. "Aye, it's a force unlike any I've seen in all my travels. It may have saved us, for now. But did you see the enemy commander? The magic didn't touch him." "Yes," she agreed, her face turning somber. "He's still a threat, and as long as he stands, so does the possibility of another attack." There was a quiet moment between them, an unspoken understanding of the uncertainty that lay ahead. The celebration in the city behind them seemed distant, almost detached from their reality atop the wall. "Melinda," Alexander began, turning towards her, "I may be a stranger in this city, a sailor swept ashore by a twist of fate, but this place and you've given me something to fight for. Whatever comes next, know that I will stand with you." His words hung in the air, creating an intimacy that neither of them expected. For a moment, all threats of danger were forgotten, and all that remained were two souls brought together by destiny, united by a common purpose. Melinda looked up at Alexander, her eyes glistening in the faint moonlight. Thank you, Alexander. Knowing you're by my side gives me hope. And right now, hope is all we have. Their words, sincere and heartfelt, marked a deep bond, one forged in the crucible of shared threat. As they looked out at the motionless army and the solitary figure of the enemy commander, they knew their trials were far from over. Chapter 5. The King's Pledge. As the dawn broke, illuminating the aftermath of the night's events, Melinda led Alexander through the palace corridors toward Prestor John's chamber. With the memories of the magic-imbued victory still fresh in their minds, the two walked with a shared sense of purpose. Are you ready, Alexander? Melinda asked, her eyes scanning his face for signs of worry. He gave her a brief nod, his expression set into a determined mask. When they entered the chamber, they found Prestor John standing by a grand window, looking out at his kingdom. He turned to face them, his eyes bright with the wisdom of years and the weight of ruling such an extraordinary city. Alexander of Constantinople, Prestor John greeted, his voice deep and resonant. I've heard of your bravery last night and of your plight. Your Majesty, Alexander began, his voice firm, I've seen the power your scholars possess. I'm here to ask for your assistance. Constantinople is under threat, and we desperately need your help. Prestor John paused, his gaze moving from Alexander to the view outside his window. A silence stretched between them, heavy with the fate of the city hanging in the balance. Go back to Constantinople, Prestor John finally said, turning back to meet Alexander's hopeful gaze. Tell your emperor to expect my aid. This magic, this power you've seen, will be at your disposal. Gratitude flooded Alexander, and he bowed deeply. Thank you, Your Majesty. Your aid will be invaluable to our survival. With the king's pledge secured, Melinda and Alexander left the chamber, their hearts filled with hope for their respective cities. As they stepped outside, the morning sun bathed the city in a golden light, and the city that had fought fiercely the night before now stood tranquil and victorious. Despite the relief, there was a pang in Alexander's heart as he realized he had to part from Melinda, a bond forged in a shared struggle. But for now, they had a mission to accomplish, and they set off towards the harbor, ready to sail back to Constantinople with the promise of Prestor John's aid. Chapter 6. Constantinople. A ship was ready for Alexander at the docks of Prestor John's city. With his heart heavy from farewells and his mind burdened with his mission, Alexander set sail, leaving the city and Melinda behind. The ship, robust and swift, cut through the sea, carrying with it the hope of Constantinople. But fortune, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. A violent storm rose, the sky darkening as roiling clouds rolled in. The sea thrashed against the ship, each wave a mighty blow. Alexander, no stranger to tempests, fought against the raging elements, but this storm was different, fierce and unforgiving. The ship groaned and splintered, succumbing to the storm's fury. Thrown overboard, Alexander found himself at the mercy of the tumultuous sea. He fought against the darkness, against the icy grasp of the water, until he could fight no more. When he awoke, he found himself washed ashore on an unfamiliar island. He was bruised, battered, and alone. But the mission, the promise he'd made to Prestor John, drove him forward. With a renewed determination, he ventured inland, hoping to find his way back home. After many trials and tribulations, he found himself standing before the gates of Constantinople, the city of his birth, the city he'd sworn to save. He sought an audience with the emperor, eager to deliver the message of hope. But instead of relief, he was met with skepticism. The emperor listened to his tale, his expression unchanging. When Alexander finished speaking, the room was filled with a deafening silence. You expect me to believe, the emperor finally said, his voice echoing in the grand hall, that you sailed to a mystical city, witnessed magic that stopped an army, and received a promise of aid from a legendary king. Alexander tried to argue, to convince the emperor, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. The emperor dismissed him, his mind set in disbelief. Disheartened but undeterred, Alexander left the emperor's presence, a plan already forming in his mind. If he could not convince the emperor, then he would prepare the city himself. After all, Prestor John's aid was on its way, and Alexander was going to make sure Constantinople was ready to receive it. Chapter 7. The Second Voyage. Prestor John's aid never arrived. In the face of disbelief and disappointment, Alexander found solace in a life of simplicity, becoming a fisherman. He found a certain peace in the rhythmic ebb and flow of the sea, its vastness reminding him of the journey he'd once undertaken and the promise that was yet to be fulfilled. A year passed. The memories of Prestor John City and the beautiful Melinda were starting to fade into the realms of dreams when the sea decided to interfere once again. An uncanny storm struck, eerily reminiscent of the one that had led him to Prestor John City in the first place. The storm was local, fiercely focused on his small fishing boat, throwing him into the familiar icy brace of the sea. When he awoke, he was greeted by the smell of foreign flora and the feeling of fine sand beneath him. Around him spread a landscape strikingly familiar. A sense of déjà vu washed over him. Could it be? Had he been returned to the land of Prestor John? Over the next few days, Alexander trekked through the strange yet familiar land. As he climbed the final hill and saw the sprawling city with its grand walls, joy surged through him. The city of Prestor John was just as he had left it, bustling with life, the people as beautiful and vibrant as ever. He was home. His first instinct was to seek Melinda. He found her in the city's main garden, her beauty undiminished. The sight of him brought a surprised gasp from her, followed by a smile that held the promise of countless tomorrows. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again, Alexander," she admitted, her voice filled with emotions. "I never thought I'd return, Melinda," he confessed. "But it seems the sea has a strange sense of humor." In the following days, Alexander was reintroduced to the city, to the king, and to a life he thought he had lost. He found joy in being part of the vibrant city again. Most importantly, he found love. In the heart of the city, under the benevolent gaze of Prestor John, Alexander and Melinda promised each other a lifetime of togetherness. They celebrated their union amidst the city's joyous cheers, their love story marking yet another magical chapter in the mystical city's tale. In the face of destiny's whims, Alexander had found a new home and a new life with Melinda within the glorious stone walls of Prestor John's kingdom. Epilogue. The Sea's Blessings. In the peaceful years that followed, Alexander and Melinda's love bloomed like the gardens they often walked in, their lives intertwining with the rhythm of the city. The sailor from Constantinople had found a new port, a new home, with the towering stone walls of Prestor John's kingdom. Alexander often found himself looking out at the sea, its restless waves a constant reminder of his past. Yet, he no longer viewed it as an adversary. Instead, he saw it as a guide, a force that had led him to this life of love and fulfillment. Every time he felt its salty breeze, he would remember his mission, the promise of aid, and his city far away but never forgotten. One day, a ship arrived at the city's harbor, its flag bearing the emblem of Constantinople. The emperor, having witnessed inexplicable storms and guided by the same sea that Alexander had braved, had sent an envoy in search of Prestor John City and promised aid. Alexander, standing next to Prestor John and Melinda, couldn't help but smile. The promise had been fulfilled, the cycle completed. As he watched the Constantinople envoys disembark, he felt a surge of contentment. His old world and new world had finally come together. And in that moment, he realized that he was no longer just a sailor or a fisherman. He was a link, a bridge between two worlds. And he had the sea to thank for it. In the years to come, Alexander would recount his adventures to their children, his tales becoming a part of the city's folklore. The sailor who had been led astray only to find a kingdom and a queen. His story was a reminder of the city's magical heritage and the mysterious forces that guarded it. Alexander, the sailor, the fisherman, the adventurer, had become Alexander, the legend. And so, within the grand walls of Prestor John City, Alexander and Melinda lived out their days, their love story forever etched in the city's heart, an enduring testament to destiny's strange and beautiful designs. Well, thanks for joining me on this journey of love and adventure. If you enjoyed this tale, you can find more stories on my website, tfhcalifornia.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.